Hi guys, this is the video section on results presentation analysis part 2. This is the write-up bit of the project. So I'm just doing this so that you can get the same insight as the rest of the group got in the lesson, but also to everyone else who was there today's lesson, so if you need the repeat to go over that. Okay, so I'll be just talking about the analysis with a few reminders about what came beforehand. Okay, so here we have just an overview of the marks. They're divided into areas, and so far I've gone through with you, I suppose, the first 2.5 sections of this. So 10 marks on the intro, 15 on the methodology, and then I've talked to you about the results presentation aspect of the critical analysis in area 3. So I'm just moving around a little bit, apologies for that. Okay, so it's area 3 that I'm going to focus on, and the idea is going over this in this video presentation, a deadline to get all sections including area 3 done by the first day back after Christmas, and obviously then you can come and see me, speak to me, email me, Teams sessions, things like that, if you need some extra advice on this as well. Okay, so I'll move on through that, and then move on to the Mart scheme. Okay, so this Mart scheme is obviously on this slideshow, but also it's in the specification, and there are 3 parts. And if I just move the mouse, hopefully you can see the mouse, we have 4 levels like all the other sections. There's 20 marks going on this bit area here. That's a third of the marks, and I'd say it's probably the most difficult section, so it's the one that you've got to really navigate through properly. Okay. So the 3 sub-criteria of this, let's try to put this into words that make a little bit more sense so you don't have to kind of fathom through all the technical jargon. Now the first bit here is when I mark this, I'll be looking to see whether you've used presentation techniques, statistical tests. So that's everything from like annotated photos, maps, graphs, summary tables, statistical tests, all those sorts of things. Okay, so that's what I look at, and they need to be suitable, so that would be clear to me. So you don't need to justify these techniques, or that doesn't hurt, you know, just as long as I've chosen this technique because. So it's worth having maybe a stab at doing that. But it will be really obvious to me whether they're appropriate techniques, whether you use the right format, and there's a nice range of them and so forth. Now it doesn't have to be all quantitative or all qualitative. There isn't a directive to say you have to do both, but to be honest, every single one of you in the geography group have got both. So quantitative are things that are numerical, can be put into graph forms, tabular form with numbers and things like that, and qualitative are more like your photographs, your maps, maybe interviews of what people have said. Okay. So basically, if you look at the levels over here, we're looking to see that, you know, there's a range of them. There's a bit of, you want a bit of complexity there, so they're not just simple like pie charts and bar graphs on their own. So you've got a nice sort of range there, 4 or 5 different sorts of techniques, maybe more, and then put into place. And we've already worked on that aspect, and I said to put them under each of the subheadings, and remember the subheadings being your key questions or your hypotheses. Okay. And then if we now move into the second sub-criteria, this is really the newer stuff that I'm talking about today. So this is your ability to interrogate. That basically means, in simple words, describe and explain what your results have shown, whether that be graphs, maps, photos, etc. Okay, so this is the bit where that you need to really put this after every graph or every resource that you use. It doesn't have to be literally graph writing, pie chart writing, photo writing, things like that. But what you want to try to avoid is having like 60 or 70 resources, one after the other, and then followed by 8 or 9 pages of writing. It's better to break it up. But it's also easier for you to navigate, as in, you know, when you put the work down and then you come back to it a day later, you don't spend half an hour trying to remember what you have and haven't done. And it's also easier for myself as the examiner to mark what's really good. It's really clear, and also adds it into the planning aspect where things are logically structured. Okay, so that's going to be the main bit of writing, but there's also some other things that you need to mention. So you're not just describing the results, you're explaining your findings, which is a bit different to what you normally do. So you're trying to give some reasons for this. And if you look at this bit here, you also, it says comment. That doesn't mean to say you're doing any paragraphs of writing, but comment on the accuracy of your results. So were they a good representation of what you found, or was there a little bit of a skew? Do you suspect the figures maybe are unreliable or not? So just a little bit of a comment on that within your writing at various points. And this bit here, it says complete use of experience to extend geographical understanding. Well, basically, if you're describing and explaining, but also linking back to some of the theory that you've talked about in the introduction, you are demonstrating a link between theory and reality, and therefore you're probably going on a wider scope. So it will be explicit in terms of it written down, but I don't think you need to be saying, you know, my geographical understanding has been expanded by this particular item. Okay, this bit is really important, and it's why I harped on so much about in the introduction that you had key terms, concepts, theory and background, because you want to link back. So you might be talking about the effect of a groin, and you might then link it to saying that these groins are showing effective, what is it, reduction in movement of longshore drift. There's a link back to your key terms. Okay, and then you might go on to explain it. You might use some of the theory. So again, it kind of marries up the theory to the reality idea. And I'll put this into a slightly easier format on the next slide. But this, you do need to look at these Mart schemes because they show the standard that has been set. And obviously I understand these Mart schemes probably a little bit more than you, but they are what I use when coming to mark your projects. Okay, and if it's in the Mart scheme, don't ignore it. That's if you want to get a really top mark, by the way. Okay, so this is a reminder about how I suggested that you lay out your results presentation. I said use your hypothesis or key questions as headings. So if you've got 2 key questions or 4 key questions, then use them as the subheadings of your results presentation analysis. Then populate it with all your presentation techniques. And then if you look at the last 2 bullet points, I won't repeat those, okay? But then I'll move on to the next slide where I kind of repeat some of the things I said with the Mart scheme, but maybe in a slightly easier format. So first point I've just said. Then let's use our team formula when analysing. So again, it's a checklist. So patterns, trends, evidence, might be some anomalies, manipulation of data. And I think that manipulation of data is really important if you're not using any statistical tests. It's not compulsory to use statistical tests. They might not be appropriate for your project. But if they're not there, I think it's really important that if you've got something, let's say one figure is double the other figure, you say so. If it's half the figure or 75%. In some instances, I've seen students say, this is 15 times bigger than this is 1/3 bigger than this, and so forth. Where there's an opportunity, for example, if you do things like mean, mode, median on averages, look at the range, simple range. So it doesn't mean to say you've got to use your standard deviation, your interquartiles, your Spearman's rank chi-squared type sort of things, okay? But do try to get those in there. Very important to use evidence so that in your writing that you're using parts of your graphs, your tables, so forth to highlight things. And if you've used stat tests, I think you need to show the workings of that. You need to discuss what those findings might be. You might be rejecting the null hypothesis, using the probability tables to say, you know, how secure the results are. But it's number 4 here that we need to go a little bit further with. We need to make sure you're explaining your results. So that's you're suggesting reasons why you know, your graphs gave the values that it did, why there might be an anomaly. And again, this is where you refer back to your key terms theory and even background in your writing. And you can even include references and sources at this point. You know, footnotes at the bottom will suffice as well. One thing I forgot to mention on point 2, look out for connections between data sets, graphs. So it might be saying, like, you can clearly see a pattern by looking at this beach profile, and when you compare beach profile A to beach profile D, you can see that the beach has become narrower, it's become steeper. This is supported by looking at figures, I don't know, 17 and 18, which are photographs. So the link doesn't always need to be something that's ultra complex, but it shows that you're kind of matching up your resources across the project. That's a very good thing to do. And then number 5, there's that thing I said about the accuracy. Are they trustworthy, reliable? And again, you don't need like paragraphs of information on this, just some information on that. Okay, so just a short video, just an extension, not the usual 20 minutes stuff that I blag on about. Okay, all right, I'm just going to push on the slide. I don't think there's another slide after this, but hopefully that's it. I forgot. Here are some examples. It's a good job I didn't switch off here. So on these slides here, you can just see some basic ways in which the student has explained. So you can see here we've got a table, and then underneath here, don't actually have to have this in, but I think it looks quite good, to be fair. It shows that there's a relationship going on. You can see there's a bit of data coming in. Look, there's some data manipulation. And if you look at this bottom bit down here, there's a little bit of an explanation of that, and you can see clear links. And when you if you put your infrastructure in, what I mean by that is all your results presentation bits in, you'll see the gaps, and you need to put in the writing that supports it. And there's a saying, don't put in pretty things because they're just like decorations going on a Christmas tree. They're just there to look pretty and don't provide a service or function. And again, here's just another example. In this instance, this is actually analysis. So the photographs they're annotated, but that actually represents some analysis, and therefore, the arrows are quite important. Obviously, the context needs to be considered. And I'll just move on to my third example now. And this is similar to the previous one here, but this is quite a complex technique in the sense of you've got 5 sites. You can see the sediment size changing quite clearly, in fact, from this. I like that. Some good annotations which are probably explaining things, and it looks really visually very, very good. Next example here. So here we've got a line of best fit. There's some commentary on it. There's some explanation on it. And here's the statistics that's being used. You can see reference to probability tables here. It's all laid out really, really well. There's even a justification for the SPIMS rank that's used. And then